Hello everybody, this is Yasmin from YarkSpiritFantasyArt.com and welcome to another illustration video tutorial. So for this week's video tutorial, I am drawing a dwarf along with an elf mourning over the death of another dwarf. So as you can see, I did quite a few preliminary rough work to figure out the general composition of my characters once I had the main focal point. Another requirement for this was that essentially there'd be a large rock or stone piece in front of them. So I did want to actually make essentially a more elaborate stone marking for essentially a hero dwarf, which is also why the elf is actually standing in comparison to the dwarf. The dwarf that's actually in front of this memorial piece, he's actually visiting the tomb of one of the fallen heroes or his best friend. So he wants to pay his respects. Now, because the elf does not share technically that same type of cultural aspect, I wanted to have the elf mourn, but in a slightly more subtle manner. Because the elf doesn't have a personal connection to this other dwarf in his campaign, I did want him to have a very strong sense, though, of respect. So although the elf is actually standing very proud, I did want him to have an almost bowing appearance to him. But it's very minute, and that's mainly because of the pride that this elf does have. He bows to practically no one. He's a higher ranking elf. But he still recognizes the fact that this is a very important occurrence for his friend, and out of respect, he does try to show his own portrayal of his sympathy towards his friend. So as you can see, I changed proportions so that the elf was actually closer to the viewer in comparison to the dwarf. I did this for a couple of main reasons. The main one was that I did want to have the elf further back, because he's not the one who's actually mourning the death or paying his respects as much as the dwarf, because the dwarf is the one who has the connection. So as I was working on this, I had to really reinforce that in both the pose and, as much as I could, the general composition of the piece. This did affect a lot of my composition, because as you can see, I do need to still show the focal point, which is the photo in between these two characters and the hammer that's above it. But in order to do that, I have to position the characters so that they work more appropriately. Now, at this stage right here, I'm still actually using a combination of the default round brush and the flat brush that I created a while back. In this stage, because the character that's going to be closest to the viewer is the elf, I do need to spend more time on the elf character, because you'll see more detail because he is closer to us. So because of this, I was also experimenting with the armor design and the general aspects of the material, because there's different ways to render different materials, and I did want to experiment with something that would hopefully be the best combination of both of those. So what I actually am doing right now too, as I'm painting this in, I am actually sampling as I go. This really does help me make sure that the colors work together and are more harmonious. But as I sample colors, I tend to sample from the same areas. This is important, because if you don't do this, then what happens with your colors is it tends to change in a very minute way throughout the piece. Now, there is a way around this problem. In Photoshop, what you can do is you have two options. You can either flatten out the entire image, which is something I don't normally do for my paintings, or what you can do too is you can go into your layer history and essentially turn off the white background. That tends to give you a more accurate sampling of the colors. But it is kind of annoying to have to keep on doing that, which is why I tend not to do that. But to alleviate that problem, what I do is I tend to sample or very close to the same areas that have the colors that I want. And I tend to keep it to the same area consistently throughout, just to prevent that from happening. Because although my overall colors will change by a very small amount, probably about 5%, but that does make a huge difference. I do know how, because of my experience, because I've been painting for quite a while, I do know how to compensate generally for those changes in colors. Now, this becomes more problematic depending on your painting style, though, and because I am actually currently working on assembling all my illustrations into a book that will come out probably in the next year or so. It is something that is more prominent in some of my other pieces, such as the freelance stuff that I do on the side. Now, because I do work with logos and stuff, that makes a huge difference. I have to make sure that the colors are 100% the same, especially in logo designs. So it's not something you normally have to worry about depending on what you're doing. If you're doing a painting like this, it's not something you're going to worry about. However, if you're trying to simplify your color palette and use very specific colors, you might want to actually save your selections of your color samples. If you don't do that, then the colors do tend to change as you start painting. Another method to work around this is what you can actually do is you can actually write down the web code for the color as well. It's nice to use the web code because essentially that transfers very easily through most software. And also, once again, it's available and you can use it online as well if you need to. There's very few instances where you would need to use that number online, but if you're doing logo designs, website designs, then yes, you would definitely use that, and then the color information becomes extremely important in that case. So as you can see, I've actually done most of the work on the elf character, and I will be working very shortly on the dwarf character next. So I'm just adding some information for the ears. I have changed the helmet quite a bit because I wasn't happy with the overall design of the helmet. Although my elf character is a different type of elf character than what you would normally see in most video games or role-playing scenarios, I did want to really showcase that it was an elf, so the easiest way to do that was actually to show the ears. So I made sure to show the ears and change the helmet to better suit a more organic feel to the character elements. So I just started working on the dwarf character right now. And as you can see, I'm just starting with the basic colors. I'm trying to tie in the colors that I do have in the elf, but I do want to give the dwarf a different color palette. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to end up adding in more earth tones to the dwarf because of the type of character that he is. This elf is more of a foliage and forest dweller type elf. So for this reason, I really emphasize the green elements in his armor. He does have leather armor on him, which explains also the multiple motifs that he's wearing and the color. But it's very indicative of being able or allowing him to blend more easily into his surroundings. The dwarf, however, because he's more related to actual earth in general, I did want to give him more of a brown look, a reddish color to him, because those colors allow him to meld in with his environment a bit more. So the color choices that I made for these characters depend on a couple factors, as you can see. The first and foremost factor is that I wanted it to reflect their origins. The second factor was I also needed to tie in all the color elements as well. So what I ended up doing is I ended up drawing some of the colors out from the elf into the dwarf, and a bit vice versa, but not to the same extent. So although the elf has some cloth material in the center for him that has a bit more of a reddish tone to it, it's not as strong of a reddish or a brown color as in the dwarf's clothing. That helps to tie them together but also distinguish them as well individually. As you can see, I just added the dwarf in the picture, and I just finalized the hammer for the character as well. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just trying to bring out some of the colors and trying to pull back some additional colors as well, because I do want a strong saturated color as much as I can get from the elf character, and I will start doing something very similar to the dwarf character as well. So now that I have my two main characters, it is important that I start adding at least a little bit of color into the background elements. So right now I'm trying to tie in both the characters, but also make the background elements look like they're receding as well. So it's finding that transitional and that good balance between those elements that does take a little bit while longer to do. So right now I'm just trying to bring out some of those red colors in the dwarf. As you can see, I'm just adding some of those colors in there slowly. If you want to have your say on what's drawn for next week's video tutorial, or have some additional questions about my drawing process, please leave a comment below. I will take the feedback you guys give me and try to answer your questions while working on next week's painting. If you want to see some of my previous works, please feel free to check out the annotations on the side of this video, or visit my channel for the full playlist. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you guys soon. Thank you and take care.